Welcome to Consider Yourself Hugged, a place to find comfort and support as you navigate your mental and emotional well-being. So sit back and relax, unless you're driving, and get ready for this week's hug. Well, here we are. I think we should give everybody the plan, because we've talked a little bit about what we're doing, but we haven't really.
We have a plan?
Well, that's a good point. That's a really good point.
I mean, we kind of have a plan. We have more of a plan today than we usually have.
We do. And actually from here through March. But today, the plan for today is sort of we'll see, because we want to talk about burnout and compassion fatigue, but we're not really sure if we want to connect them and talk about all of that today, or if we want to divide it. So it really just depends on, we're going to start with burnout, I think. But then if compassion fatigue keeps sneaking in there, then we'll do them both, right?
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
then, so it's either going to be part 1 and part 2 of compassion or burnout and compassion fatigue, or burnout this week, compassion fatigue the next week, and then we chose a book. I bought it as a paperback, but since it won't be here for a couple days, we just decided last night, right?
Yes.
And it's called The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. And so I bought it on Audible and as a paperback. So I listened to 11 minutes of it this morning. By the way, it's read by Maggie Gyllenhaal. So that's kind of fun if
That
you
is
know who she.
very cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have her in my head now as um but it's basically, I'm not going to read every bit of the description, but Michelle and I were talking when we were Googling books about depression. And I should probably back up and say we did Chatter, which really is more about anxiety and spiraling thoughts. And then we realized that it would be good to also address depression. And this book is fiction, but it traces, it's a woman named Esther, it's fiction, Esther Greenwood, and it says that the author draws us into her breakdown with such intensity that Esther's insanity becomes completely real and even rational. And so we're looking at her struggles with I think depression, but it's called A Haunting American Classic. So every single time we looked at depression, that book came over and over and over and over and over. So we haven't had anybody like personally recommend it, but that's what we're doing. So we'll do that episode 2 weeks from, right? Yeah, 2 weeks, the last Wednesday in February. And then March, we've alluded to this a little bit, but in March, we're going to do 4 weeks of using tools of AI to help with your emotional and mental well-being. So we're not talking about using it for therapy, although there's, some benefit in doing some chatting with AI, but that's not what we mean. Is there's so many things that you can be doing with AI, everything from saving time to communicating better, to help you have um, just to help you have less angst in your life. And so we will address, no, we neither one of us are AI experts, but my son will be on with us at least once. And so we'll address some of your concerns, and we'll try to pull the tools that are just really, really easy to use. So that's the plan, right, Michelle?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And how it can help with burnout, which we're talking about today.
Ooh, that was a really good transition. Have you been thinking about that the whole time?
No, no, just now.
And then just so y'all know, following up from that too, we're going to do a live event here in White House, Tennessee. And then we're going to like a lunch and learn kind of thing. And then we're going to do a 3-hour live event somewhere in the Nashville area. And then we're going to see how it goes. Because our goal, our mission is mental and emotional well-being. And if AI can help with that, we want to figure out how. And to help you with burnout. All right. So I'm tossing, Michelle, to you.
Yes. So I am going to talk first about the definition of burnout. And so, World Health Organization classifies burnout as an occupational phenomenon, but I also want to say that I did some research on things like um, parent burnout and caregiver burnout and so forth. So, even though in terms of how it's classified right now, it's classified more in an occupational
Mhm,
sense,
mhm.
it can really apply across the board in some ways. And so World Health Organization defines burnout as a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. It is characterized by three dimensions. One, feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion.
Everybody's
Two,
going, "Yes, me." Sorry, go ahead.
Two, increased mental distance from one's job or feelings of negativism or cynicism related to one's job. And three, reduced professional efficacy. So again, they're defining it from the sense of an occupational standpoint. And it actually has an ICD, not 10, ICD 10 code. It has an ICD 11 code. And what that means is if something has an ICD-10 code, then it's a diagnosis. But an ICD-11 code is still something that can impact health. They're not classifying it
Okay.
as a disease, but they are classifying it as something that can impact your health. But when you think about these things, I mean, it really can be, like a description across the board for so many things.
So, coming from your background and what you do, what do you think about? Because I read that too, that it was I knew based on what I read that it was not classified as a medical condition, but I didn't realize it was because ICD-11 is not a medical condition. But just from your perspective and all the people that you see in clinic, do you think that it should be classified as a medical condition, or do you think we already have enough to?
No, I think the ICD-11 is appropriate. I think that um, burnout is a symptom of something else.
Okay. I mean, I think that too.
Yeah.
And I have one more question about that because I don't really understand. Because ICD is International Classification of Diseases. So, what is 10 versus 11? I mean, I know, like, why is it even in this book? Like, what are other things? And maybe you don't know because we didn't even talk about this as usual before. But what are some other things classified in the 11 that wouldn't be in the 10? Or do we need to look?
I can't really, I would be guessing if I were to
That's fine.
say, because when it comes to billing, like ours goes by F codes.
Mm, mm,
And so like I can't necessarily tell you, but like all of these codes really come into classification, which ties into billing and things like that. So
okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I remember because I worked in healthcare years ago and I did some of the insurance stuff. And I remember it was those numbers.
mhm.
It's all about the billing, it's all about the insurance. And I'm a big word person. So I do have some feelings and thoughts. There's part of me that thinks, because you know how I feel about the word stress. And
Mhm.
so, but there's part of me with all the words that wants to be very specific about it. But then there's another part of me that's like, does it matter what we call it? Um, and I'll tell you where I land in a minute. But I mean, because you just said burnout is really defined as an occupational thing, but you feel like it can be in other areas as well. So do you care about the words that are used, or what is your thought? If that even makes sense.
So I think in this case, and again, like understanding it, because we've talked to, and I love the way you describe stress is, that's an overarching word, but there are reasons, there are things that make up stress. And to really, manage, identify, you have to look at those things. In this case, because there's so many different possibilities in terms of what's causing that workplace discomfort. I think they're using it as that overarching word to mean something really uncomfortable
Hmm.
that is overwhelming
Right.
to the
And
person.
I mean, do you ever feel, well, let's back up. Um, so I'll tell you where I land on this too. I teach workshops on burnout, and then I teach workshops on compassion fatigue. Now, I feel like we will get to compassion fatigue today, but who knows? Um, and I think so. I've spent a lot of time researching, like, because I do land on here's where I land. I think it is important. I can be talked out of it, but I think it is important to try to decide what it is we want to call it, like what it is we're experiencing. And so the way that I look at it, so you kind of help guide me through this, burnout, I do feel is very much attached to work. When I think about things like parenting or caregiving or any of that, it feels like it goes over to compassion fatigue. So can I read you this chart that I have?
Sure.
So it's very similar to what you said. Burnout results from chronic workplace stress and an overwhelming workload. All right, everybody out there in virtual land, raise your hand if you
Mhm.
overwhelming workload. Honestly, I think that I am in a very good place right now, work-wise. Um, Whereas compassion fatigue results from prolonged exposure to the suffering of others. So it's very much related to taking care of other people or hearing other people suffering. So when I think about, for example, parenting, I'm like, where does that fall? Do you know what I mean? I don't mean to
Mhm.
just be like splitting hairs here, but it is interesting because burnout, too much work, too many tasks, too many projects, too many phone calls. I can't, well, I don't like to use the word can't, but I don't take days off. I don't take a lunch. I don't, all of that. And then compassion fatigue being I'm taking care of this person who's suffering. I'm in healthcare. I'm in education. or maybe I'm in HR and people come to me all the time and it's like secondary trauma, vicarious trauma, and I'm just exhausted because of that. So, where do you think people like parents, for example, lie?
I think in some of the research I did in preparation for this, you know, I think that recognizing things where, because again, like when you're parenting the child, it's not like they're always suffering, but
Right.
there's high demands on the parent. And so it's kind of like a 24/7 job.
Mm,
And so well, it is a 24/7 job. So like whether
it
you're
is.
home, whether you're, whether you work, whether you're a stay-at-home mom, still if something comes up with your children, they're, they're in your care. And so I think that like taking time for yourself, recognizing that, taking breaks, things like that can be essential, because what we're going to talk about really is how do you avoid burnout. And from the research I was doing, a lot of it said that, parents knew when that was happening because they would get snappy with their kids.
Mm,
They would be too irritable, like they didn't want to be, like things that they didn't have as much patience. And when you, like, the last line of that burnout was, decreased job efficacy. And so I heard a lot of stories in doing the research of parents who felt like they were not being the parent that they wanted to be because they had that sense of overwhelm and needing a break. And so, back to kind of the ICD-10, ICD-11 thing, like it's not like burnout is a disease. It is a symptom that when you address it and you take care of yourself can reset. And so one of the statistics that from a NAMI study was in 2024 was that, let me find it here, that 52, 51, sorry.
no, it's okay. I love that you went out and got some very um, recent and applicable statistics. And when we're done, um, you tell me when you found it, because I was just going to interject that I really feel this great organization. I don't know about y'all, but I just love to have things organized in my mind because the way that you address, for example, or prevent compassion fatigue is actually a little different than you would with burnout. And what you just said made my mind go poof. Parenting is a job. I
Yeah, I
mean,
mean, it is.
it
I
is.
agree. Like it's
Stay-at-home mom, stay-at-home parents. That's your job. That's your
right.
focus. And so,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah.
So it says the NAMI study in 2024, which varies, percent of employees reported
But
experiencing
but
burnout in the past year.
say you completely froze. So say
Oh, I'm
just
sorry.
that's okay. The
Um,
statistic again.
2024 survey by the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI, said that it showed 52% of employees that they surveyed reported experiencing burnout in the past year. And the important thing to kind of recognize there, they experienced it. It doesn't say that they maintained it throughout the whole year, but they had some level of experience with burnout in the previous year.
That's an important distinction too that you pulled out. That I mean, burnout can it's going to last different times for different
Yeah.
people. So,
Excuse me. And then they gave some statistics by different groups. Healthcare workers, 60% reported experiencing burnout in the past year. Project managers, 50%. Teachers, 48%. And those were the
mm.
highest occupations within their survey that expressed experiencing burnout.
And I think with the helping occupations, it can be a combination of burnout and compassion fatigue. And so, we are going to cover both of those and however, but I just want to make sure and kind of reiterate burnout, I think, is a lot from the tasks and the pulling and just like Michelle said, if it's parenting, it doesn't mean that your children are suffering all the time or that you're actually caregiving the whole time. It's all of the other tasks like driving places but compassion fatigue is more related to the suffering of other people. So, but that's why the helping professions can have both. I mean, anybody
Mhm.
can, but
Yeah.
especially if you're in a helping position or a helping role, or maybe you're a parent and you're also caregiving for someone who is ill. Um, does that make
Yeah.
sense that you
Yeah.
can?
And I think that the factors that play a part, kind of again, um, like from the research, the factors that play a part in burnout versus compassion fatigue are a little different. Like for burnout, factors that are implicated are workload, lack of control over your workload, or say in your decisions, schedule, processes,
So like no
in
autonomy, like you
no
just,
autonomy. Yeah, you have no control over kind of what you're doing day per day. Insufficient reward, not receiving adequate recognition, praise, or career advancement opportunities for your work. Work-life balance, difficulty
Mhm.
separating work from personal life, leading to long hours and neglecting personal needs. Poor work environment, negative relationships with colleagues, lack of supportive leadership, or a toxic workplace culture. And then personal factors can contribute, things like perfectionism, high achieving
Mm.
personalities, difficulty saying no, and underlying personal stress.
Yikes.
Yeah.
We're putting all that in the show notes,
Okay. Yes.
right?
Yes.
And okay, so I want to address one thing too, because I'm always gonna, if I think it's appropriate, talk about, my study and views. So when you talked about work-life balance, I think you've seen this before. I show it all the time, but I don't remember if I've shown it here. The video I took of Channel 2 News, maybe not. So here in
I think
Nashville,
I have, but I don't, yeah, I don't think but I don't
it might
remember,
have
but
been a
yeah.
while. Well, we weren't planning on, so I'm not going to pull it up and show it because it'll take too long, and it's only like 5 seconds. But it was a spot on the morning news a couple years ago, and the anchor was talking about seasonal affective disorder, and he was obviously reading the teleprompter, talking about what to do, good sleep hygiene, meta, I don't remember what else. And then on the teleprompter, again, he was obviously reading, have good work-life balance, and then off teleprompter, he went, good for you. So, you know, the world
Yeah.
telling us that, and look, I get it. Somebody who does the morning news, they have to get up at probably 2 a.m. And I don't mean to be like snarky or lack compassion, but you know, no, I was going to say that's your choice, but that did sound awful. But you know what I mean? It's because we
Yeah,
hear those,
yeah.
well, good for you. If you have work-life balance, you must have an easy job and you must, but part of that is a choice, and we all are in seasons of life. That's the thing to remember. If you have a little baby or you're caring for a parent or you're ill or you're in the middle of something huge at work, we all go through seasons. But burnout is when we don't recognize that that self-care is important and we just keep going and keep going and keep going. So anyway, but all those things that you said, that's that's huge. I really am glad we're doing compassion, fatigue, and burnout together.
Yeah, me too.
Um, do you want me to read this quiz real quick?
Yes.
And then maybe we can talk a little bit about, so we talked about the symptoms a little bit, and then maybe we can talk about some ways to prevent it. Is that what comes next?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to read these very fast because it's in the show notes and you can pause this and go take it and come back and visit. But there's 15. Literally, I'm going to read them pretty fast. So if you're driving or something, you want to try to keep count. But what you're doing is you're scoring 0 to 5. 0 is not at all. 5 resents very often. Number 1, I feel exhausted even after a good night's sleep. Okay, and I'm just going to pause and remind you 0 is nah, and 5 is always. Number 2, I find it difficult to concentrate or stay focused. Number 3, I frequently feel irritable or impatient. Number 4, I have lost interest in activities that used to bring me joy. Number 5, I have difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep. Number 6, I often feel overwhelmed by my responsibilities. And I think you even said that, like almost word for word. Number 7, I frequently experience physical symptoms like headaches or stomach aches. By the way, Michelle and I always tell everybody, regardless of if you're having any kind of symptoms, you think they're mental health or physical health, just go to the doctor and get that off your plate. Just make sure physically you're all good. Number 8, I have difficulty completing tasks or meeting deadlines. Number 9, I feel emotionally drained. Number 10, you use this. I have a negative or cynical attitude towards work or life in general. Number 11, you said this. I have a decreased sense of accomplishment or satisfaction in my work. That happens a lot. Both of us coming from an education environment, you go in there wanting to change the world. And if we're not careful, we start being, you know, never going to change.
Well, you make a good point in that career fields where you don't see the fruit of your labor immediately
Yes.
can definitely contribute. I mean, like, I'm sure so many teachers have students who come back later and tell them how much they meant to them, how they changed their lives. That student may have, like, been incredibly difficult in the moment. They may have been going through something incredibly difficult, but it took years before you kind of saw that. So, I mean, there are multiple career fields like that to where you kind of go, dealing with the negatives that are going on, knowing that there will be benefit later. You just don't get to see them.
You went from one career like that to another because I'm sure it takes time in what you do to see the fruits of your labor. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I think that like there's a lot of overlap between teaching and nursing. I mean,
Hmm.
there is. I mean, like of the top career fields, healthcare and teaching, like of the top three, burnout, like they were both in there. So yeah, yeah.
Well, and they're the ones that have the overlap between burnout and compassion fatigue.
Yes.
Let's see. Number 12, I have difficulty disconnecting from work or taking breaks. How is that kind of work-life balance? Number 13, I often feel unmotivated or lack energy. Number 14, I have been neglecting my own self-care or personal needs. And number 15, I frequently think about quitting my job or making a significant change in my life. So a lot of those I think went along very well with what you said. And so do take time. And the score basically, here's what, and I'll speak for me. I don't know about you, Michelle. I like assessments just as an overall, where might I be in my life? And I like them to look at the specific, like sometimes we take an assessment, we get a score, and we don't look at the individual components. Like for you, it might be more of sleeping and physical symptoms and exhaustion. For somebody else, it might be a lack of energy, or, you know what I mean? So pay attention to how you scored the individual ones. And be careful about using it as a comparison tool if you take it with someone else. You know what I mean? Like, ooh, you have a 3, low burnout. I have a 20. Let's see, what was a, I have a, think of the highest one. I have a 74. Must be nice that you don't do that. Um, but in general, a 0 to 15 is indicative of low burnout. I'm not going to go through all of it because you can read it. Um, a 16 to 30 is indicative of moderate burnout, and a 31 to 45 high, and 46 to 75 severe. So just a generalized thing. You know, we're never here to give you therapy or specific guidance. It's an overview, but at least it gives you a place to start. Any thoughts about that, Michelle? Or are you ready to talk about the positive part? Like, what do we do?
Well, I think that I mean I agree with you, like assessments, just to kind of have an idea of where you are, just kind of that self-awareness is
Yeah,
always
I think
really
a
helpful. Yeah.
baseline.
Yeah. And so you know, we before we talk about factors to change burnout or to help with burnout, I'm going to also kind of read from the survey some specific situations that can lead to burnout.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Good.
And so just some things to kind of be aware of if any of these things have happened recently within your workplace and you're kind of feeling that burnout feeling, it could be very well, you know, that with these changes, they do correlate that with increased burnout. And so we've already mentioned the first one, working in high stress professions like healthcare, social work, emergency services, experiencing significant organizational changes or restructuring. So if there's been major changes, major restructuring, that can contribute. Taking on additional responsibilities without appropriate compensation, and then working in a role with unclear expectations or conflicting demands. And so I think it's important to kind of know some of the things causing burnout because it's key when it comes to preventing it.
So what I'm hearing, 'cause we'll put that in the show notes too, and that's really another form of an assessment. So what you can do is take what Michelle just said about your workplace, and remember, your workplace might be your home. So it might be as a parent, you know, if you had
Mhm.
significant changes, like you just had a new baby. I mean, you know, you can translate that. So you can look at your environment and then you can look at yourself. And Michelle, I learned that we can pause the recording. If I don't go pee, I'm going to die. So, two assessments, symptoms. What's next, Michelle?
So now let's talk about like how to prevent or combat
No, right, prevent.
burnout. And so the global survey like said that in 2024 when the World Health Organization, when they did their 2024 survey worldwide, they got 78% of employees worldwide reported feeling some sort of um, burnout within the past year. So it's definitely a huge thing. And so when we're looking at preventing burnout, we and there's a couple of different models you can use or look at. The one I'm going to kind of talk through is a nursing theory, just because I'm a nurse and we learn a lot of theories in nursing
You
school.
guys, right. That's
Yes,
right.
and so there's a nursing theory called comfort theory. It's by a
Mhm.
nurse called Catherine Kolkaba. It was one of my favorite theories in like graduate school. And it has three different parts when it comes to comfort. And when you think about burnout, you know, you're talking about a feeling, a sentiment, a place of being very overwhelmed.
Mhm.
And so I'm trying not to use the word stress.
No,
Um,
you know I would never call you out.
but I mean, it's a point of being very overwhelmed. And so, like we were saying before, a key thing is what's causing that, what key components are causing that, and what can or can't be done about it. And so in this comfort theory, there's three different states that she talks about: ease, relief, and transcendence. Ease being kind of a state of not really having that sense of feeling overwhelmed or stressed, so things are going pretty good, not really struggling. And then as things gain in, feeling overwhelmed and stressed, as things start happening, people start feeling it and they look for a sense of relief somehow, whether that is talking to their supervisor, whether that is um, trying to change workload. Oftentimes, if the first few things they do doesn't really help, they seek relief by changing jobs. So you see places where there's really high turnover rate. And then there is transcendence, and that was more described as kind of having yourself rooted in things that helps with that internal feeling of overwhelm, managing things. The situations haven't necessarily changed, but you just are experiencing it differently. Because if you think about it, burnout has a lot to do with sensation perception. Not to say that workloads aren't often unrealistic, because they often are.
Right.
And but in terms of how we experience those things, that's kind of what we're looking at. Um,
Is
that is not to say that that means, like, if you can, like, reach that place, that's not to say that you should put up with abusive
right.
or unrealistic expectations in the workplace.
You know, is it fair? Is this comparison a good comparison? So anyone who knows me knows that teaching was was not good for me.
Mhm.
And I try to say, if you're my students out there, I loved you, but there was just a lot about teaching, a lot that wasn't good for me. And so during the first few years for a teacher is very overwhelming because you are
Mhm.
starting from scratch. And so your whole work day is performing in front of this group of students. You do have, depending on what you do, a short period of time where you're supposed to grade and take care of everything that was done that day or the days before, and then plan everything out that you're going to do for for the upcoming times. And usually that means, at least in the first few years, is taking mounds of paperwork home. Um, I feel like for most teachers, that should lighten up, but that's a whole nother discussion about, lots of things. But for me, the feeling overwhelmed was different from, for example, Jennifer Moore. Jennifer Moore is someone Michelle and I taught with who still teaches. She's probably in her 30th, I don't know, she's been teaching for a long time, 25. And so I really have to believe that when she would go home, I'm sure she sometimes felt overwhelmed, but it was different, I think, because she felt like it was her calling and she had a passion for what she did. And so her times of potential burnout, by the way, we have not talked to Jennifer about this. I'm just saying what I think was probably different from me because I felt that it was a huge burden and I hated every second of it. And then you're probably somewhere closer to the Jennifer model. Is that like when you talked about um, you talked about perception or something? Is that a fair story comparison?
I think so. I think that you make a really good point that purpose does go a long way. It doesn't necessarily prevent it, because we know that, like, people in healthcare and education do see a lot of purpose in their work. But I think it goes back to what we were saying before. There are moments where you don't see the fruits of your labor right at that moment, or there's something that's happened that's been difficult.
Well, think about the pandemic.
Yes.
Healthcare, nurses, teachers, everybody.
Absolutely. Well, and I
Huge.
think that those professions are, but when you have purpose, you care. Sometimes you do ask yourself, am I helping? Am I making a difference?
Hmm.
And so I think that that can contribute to preventing burnout. But I think also there are moments where, you know, the compassion fatigue and burnout kind of, like you said, they intersect. Like, am I making a difference? And do I have it in me to keep making a difference?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let's wrap that part together. I want to make sure because you made a really good point too. So even someone like a Jennifer or, anyone, I know we're referring to healthcare and nursing and education. It's because that's where we come from.
Mhm.
Or even my time on the road with Skill Path doing, if you're out there and you travel all the time, oh my gosh, it was so hard. But I did love it. But there were still moments. So, to Michelle's point, maybe what we're talking about here are two different things. Like what I'm talking about is more of a mismatch of jobs, which probably led me to feel burnout sooner, maybe.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, yeah. I'm sure. Yeah.
but with someone who had more of a passion, it wasn't a mismatch, but you're still going to get overwhelmed when some of these things happen.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
okay, what's next?
And so I think when we're looking at the things that are supposed to be the key aspects of burnout, and we look at each one, I think that, like, in the beginning, like really taking a look at what am I able or capable of doing? Because the first one's workload. And so we all know that, we can voice things to supervisors, we can voice things to, people who run and own the company, the leadership, but that doesn't mean your workload's going to change.
Right.
And so you kind of have to look at, okay, what what am I okay with, and what would I need in order to function in this environment?
Mm.
And
I think
yeah.
some people don't even start there because many times, and I've been there before too, we unknowingly operate under this umbrella of there's nothing I can do and I just have to put up with it instead of at least thinking it through. Like you all know, if you listened to last week or the week before, Michelle and I went on a retreat together and we did a lot of brainstorming, and it wasn't problem solving really. We were trying to plan out our 2025 year. But there were so many things that came out of that because we were talking and writing and sharing. And you can do that when it comes to this kind of thing too.
Mhm.
Looking at like what are the two things you just said? What you said two things.
Like when it comes to
You said what am I okay with? And then you said something right before that.
what would it take for me to function within this required parameter? Because one of the things that the study said is when you have a workload that matches your capacity, then it prevents burnout. So, like, is the workload within your capacity? Is what they're asking for something that, if you made changes, could be achievable or not? Because I think a lot of times, like, we as workers think, or we as individuals think, like you said, like, this is it, this is the perimeter, this is what I'm supposed to do. And it's,
Mhm.
we get to that point where we really need relief, and the relief is I'm leaving. I'm going to go to a different job. And so, like, looking at, like, is there anything that could help with this struggle I'm going through? Is there anything that could help increase work capacity? If that is something you choose to do, if there are enough benefits where you want to stay where you are, you need to stay where you are versus
Right.
going
Moving
somewhere
on.
else. Yes. And, a lot of jobs burn out. Like we said, it's not long term. You may have periods of burnout and it's temporary. And you can do all the rest of self-care things and kind of um, get out of that. But at the same time, when it's workload that's causing burnout, I mean, that really is what you're looking at is, can I do this? Is there anything that could be helpful to help me do this? Do I want to do this?
Ooh, those are three really good questions that we'll have to put in the show notes. And a really powerful one is, do I want to do this? And if not, excuse me, there's just not one job for each person. And Michelle and I were talking when I did the seminar work, and I was on the road so much, and we all have our sort of I don't want to say breaking point, what's like our bar. And what made me leave the company I was working with was I'd been working with them for probably 4 or 5 years, traveling all over the world, delivering these live seminars. And I had to cancel one for the first time because my son was in critical care. At first, they thought he had, oh, what's the pulmonary? I can't remember.
Embolism?
Yes, he thought he had a pulmonary embolism. It was awful. I was on an airplane trying to get to him. And in our contract, it said that they could recoup their expenses. Could. They didn't have to. And that company asked me for $1,500. And I was like, this doesn't fit with, I had already been experiencing some things and I transitioned and went to another company. And life went on, and it was so much of a better company. And it was here's the thing that was interesting to me. It was the exact same pay. These seminar companies, and I'm not going to say any names, but they all work very similar to one another. They're public companies where trainers go out and do seminars like in the Nashville area. Companies would get a marketing piece and they would say, "Hey, do you want to go to this business communication seminar at the Hilton?" So it's that. So the other company paid the same booking schedule. I mean, very similar, but the way they treated us was completely different, and it made all the difference in the world. So, and
It's that kind of leads into the next parameter, and that was perceived lack of control.
mm,
Yes.
hmm
And so, kind of like you said, like how someone treats you can make all of the difference. If someone like you express concerns and they listen and they validate you versus you expressing concerns and then minimizing your concern or telling you that it's actually not a concern, like that can definitely contribute to burnout. So,
and going forward too, FYI, people, we are going to talk about how artificial intelligence can help you with some of these things,
mhm.
by the way. So, okay, what else, Michelle? These are so good.
um, the next one, reward. If the intrinsic and extrinsic rewards from your job don't match the amount of effort and time you put into them, then you're likely to feel like the investment is not worth the payoff. And so I think that is, one of the contributing factors was um, perfectionism, type A personalities, people who like go 100%. Let me say, they go 200%
Yeah, yeah.
into what they're doing. And then there's an expectation that there will be some type of return on that level of investment. And that sometimes doesn't happen. And that can lead to burnout. That can lead to a very quick like shift. So, is the reward, is the
hmm
benefit equal to the expectation? And we talk a lot on here about expectations.
We do.
And so, like, are the expectations realistic? That's kind of another way to, fight burnout. Like, are your expectations realistic with the situation? And again, not to say that the requirements of the job, I'm not saying like that it's always okay or that they're not asking for too much. I'm not saying that, but at the same time, like are your expectations
Yeah.
realistic with that current position?
I'm trying to remember if it was in Shrinking, um, which I said last time I would highly recommend. It does have a lot of language in it, but I think it was in Shrinking where Liz, who is a stay-at-home mom, her boys are grown, they go to college, and but she's always going like way over and above with everything, and then she gets mad when
Mhm.
people don't respond with, was it in Shrinking?
I think so. Yes. Yeah. She gives the rocks to people.
Yes, and
Hmm.
but she was doing something for someone and they did not give her the accolades. I mean, she went way, way, way over and above. And her husband said to her, if I'm wrong, I'll correct it and put it in the show notes because we were watching a couple shows at one time. But her husband said, we appreciate that you do these things, but you do these things because you want us to thank you and praise you, and that just doesn't always work. Which I thought, wow, I can't believe you said that to her. But does that ring a bell?
Are you sure it wasn't Landman?
Oh, it was Landman. Isn't it good that Michelle and I watched some of the same shows? It was Landman.
Yes,
That's what
yeah.
I told you. I was having trouble pulling it out. I was like, I can't remember the exact. It was Landman. Oh, that has
But
a lot of
Liz, it's a
language.
similar situation with Liz as well.
It is, but her
When the
husband.
expectations
Yeah.
are different than the reality, and so there is like an emotional downside.
Yeah. Like if
Yeah.
in Landman, if she was just going to make dinner, then most people are like, oh, this is really good, thank you. But she doesn't just make dinner. She makes an event like with the decor and a
Yes.
theme. And then
Yeah.
sometimes people didn't want to eat it because it was weird and she
Mhm.
just broke down, got her feelings hurt.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Well,
Okay.
and like I'm glad you mentioned because the next one is community. Who do you work with or around? How supportive and trusting are those relationships? In many cases, you can't choose your colleagues and clients, but you can improve the dynamic. It could be as simple as taking the time to ask others how their day is going and really listening. And so, in addition to that, I would definitely add when it comes to community, your sense of community at work. I mean, look at shrinking as the perfect example. They have such a good community there in their office. And
Hmm.
it makes all the difference whether it is kind of a supporting kind of family-based community or whether it is something that is more negative. Like, I think that there can definitely be a culture, particularly when things aren't going well, that wants that cynicism, which it gives as one of the symptoms of burnout.
Right.
Once the cynicism sits in, and that kind of becomes more of the theme or the topic of conversations, it affects what that community looks like.
It does. You know, Gracie, that used to be on here with us, talks a lot about the system influence. And she talks about, like our influence on each other, which impacts if it's a workplace or your family overall, which then impacts you. And so that cynicism can be, and you mentioned a good point too, like when we watch Shrinking, they're all together in an office. And I know you and your workplace are together in an office. Me and my workplace, we're all virtual. And
Mhm.
we meet on Teams every week, which is great. But the other day, I think I've already said this, but I needed to have, and occasionally I'll have a Teams meeting with just one person. But I had a Teams meeting with someone I never had individually before. We talked about our families, and it was so great. And then yesterday, I had a meeting with somebody else individually, and I was like, this is what we need to be doing more to form this community. But you have to figure out what you want, right? Like, how much community do you want with your team? But we are
Yeah,
wired to.
I mean, absolutely, because like the emotional, because the research gave 5 symptoms from an emotional standpoint of burnout, and they were helplessness, cynicism, sense of failure or self-doubt, decreased satisfaction, feeling detached or alone in the world. So community is a really strong preventative factor for those emotional symptoms of burnout. And then the other two, so we're going to talk about next fairness, thinking about whether you believe that you receive fair and equitable treatment.
Mhm.
For example, do you get acknowledged for your contributions, or do other individuals get praised and your work goes unnoticed? And then values mismatch. If you highly value something that your company does not, your motivation to work hard and persevere can significantly drop.
Wow. And I think, well, we've both experienced that. Let's just say that, you know.
And yeah, and I think that like when you're looking at this is always kind of a checks and balance type of thing. Like, is this burnout something that's going to get better? Is it something that can resolve? Are the things contributing to burnout, like from the things we've talked about, changeable? If they're not changeable, is this something kind of back to that comfort theory? Is this something you kind of want to find that transcendence in terms of finding a way to anchor yourself to where it isn't the same type of overwhelm? Or
Right.
is this something that you just don't want to be on board with? And like what you were saying with what happened with you, like it's time
Mhm.
to find a new opportunity.
And it was. And it was part of what you said too about fairness and feeling like, because I did call them and had a very, um, what I thought was a very calm voice to voice conversation, but it was like, sorry, this is our policy. So,
Okay. You
like, yeah,
didn't
this,
necessarily get a sense that they care.
no, not at all.
Yeah.
And so I knew that it was time because there were other things as well, but I knew that it was time. These are so good. So, so good.
I think like from a leadership standpoint, like if you have individuals who like work for you, I think that one of the things about burnout is it's so much easier to prevent on the beginning side versus trying to turn it around once those
Once
things
you,
have set in.
mhm,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, what else do you want to say about burnout?
I don't think anything. I think I'm done.
Well, I think with, I think it was good to partner this with compassion fatigue.
Yes.
So this is definitely two parts.
Yes.
Okay. And I think we had a nice little transition there in the middle when we went from burnout to compassion fatigue. So,
Yes. I think so.
all right. Well, that's all I have. How about you?
Yep. No, that's it.
Okay. Well, I hope you all are enjoying the new show notes. We are going to get to the point sometime soon where we rebrand a little bit, and, bring all of Michelle's stuff back on, but it's just a slow process. But we have been using AI to take our transcript, help us generate it, put some cute little emojis in there, and it also tells me the links that we promised to you. So just bear that in mind as we go forward to our AI with helping you with just mental and emotional well being. So, rate, download, follow us in our Facebook group. Tell us what you'd like to hear more of. Go buy that book, Sylvia Plath. The bell. What is wrong with me? I can't. What did
The
I say?
bell jar.
The bell jar. The
Yeah.
bell jar. Okay. And that's all we got. So,
Until next time,
consider yourself.
yourself hugged.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.